work and life. Again, my name is Eric Antons. And for the next 45, 50 minutes, we're going to be talking about this thing called, well, work-life balance. One more thing I do want to highlight, and Kelly mentioned it, I welcome your participation. You know, when people participate, it just makes for better training. There's just a more lively exchange of ideas and information. And well, it serves to animate me, which is a good thing. But it also, on a personal level, when you participate, it makes it more memorable for you. You see, all of this information is designed to be of some value to you. But if you don't remember any of it, how valuable can it really be? But the extent that you participate, it just generates a more, well, robust association. It's a connection with me, with this event, and you're just more likely to lock in this kind of memories and this information. And that's really what we're hoping to accomplish here, that you can take away something here of value to you and integrate that into your life. So let's get started with the topic at hand here, and that's balancing work-life. I'm going to turn off my camera. Maybe I'll turn it back on in just a little bit. And let's jump into the training at hand. So we're going to talk about this thing called work-life balance. And, it's a very sort of subjective experience when we look at it. It's, what may be imbalanced to one person may be perfectly balanced to another. And our balance, it shifts and changes over time. But when we think about work-life balance, there's this idea that, well, your life, as it's conducted outside of work, likely, will impact your work to some extent. We like to think that they're separate. We don't bring our personal lives to work, but hey, we do. It's impossible for that not to happen. And then, of course, what's going on with your work life is probably impacting your personal life. Let me give you an example. So my elderly mother, she's 90 years old. She's now living with me. So that has been a huge shift in my life. I have to hire caregivers to come in every day. But when they leave, that becomes my job. And so my personal life is, well, pretty constricted right now. It's filled with the caring for my mom. And does it impact my work? Oh, you betcha, it definitely does. And so I'm taking more time off, and constant distractions and worries. And so, it's inevitable that that's going to happen. But if things, of course, in life, things shift and change. And, one of the things you tend to kind of find is that when people experience this thing called balance, well, they're happier. There's increased satisfaction, the sense of well-being. And when there's imbalance, there's sort of conflicts. Either you're working too much, or there's something going on in your personal life that's affecting your work. And there's conflict there between the roles that we have in life, that is employee, and the roles we have in our personal life, whether that's, a parent, whether it's, a child, whether it's, being a spouse, or, whatever other roles you may have in your life. So what I'd like to ask you, and I'm going to encourage you to use that question feature, is, so what's creating imbalance for you? What work or family conflicts are really the most difficult parts of your life right now? Is it stuff that's happening at work that's, causing the imbalance? Is it something in your personal life? And what might be some of the barriers to achieving balance? So go ahead, feel free to respond in that chat feature. Another way to ask that question, I think, is just, so what brought you here? Work-life balance. What brought you to this training? What's going on? Somebody says lack of time. Yeah, lack of time. If there were more hours in the day, well, that might be great. But the fact is that there aren't. There are 24 hours in the day, and something's got to give, right? Is that work? Is that family? Tips and ideas for balance. New role with skills to learn. So there's a lot going on at work. There's a lot of change perhaps, and you got a new role, and there's always, an an adjustment associated with a new role. It feels like we can't say no to unexpected things that come up. Yeah, we're going to talk about that word no today, and we'll talk about ways of, setting limits, as difficult as that might be. Let me read more here. Increased workload, family with health and medical needs. Yes, it's hard to balance, to make priorities first. Yeah, feeling like I've got to do everything. Yeah. Balance is subjective, right? Well, how do we create feelings of balance when there are always trade-offs between work and life? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about ways of kind of getting an idea of how that sort of works. And yeah, we'll do some exercises here today. Working both for yourself and part-time jobs, or for the work and family expectations. I'm going to read more of these as they come through here. Medical issues and things just back up. Non-flexible schedule at work. Full-time and part-time jobs. Work with family expectations. Retention of staff is challenging, so we're constantly short-staffed. And current staff are just doing multiple jobs in the meantime. Yeah, and so, one of the things we certainly are, going to address here to some extent is potential for burnout. When things get imbalanced, what typically starts to happen is you have a chronic stressor on your hands. So whether that's something going on in your personal life, caring for an elderly parent, or maybe you have family members with medical issues, or perhaps you have something yourself happening there, or you have a financial problem, or you have difficulty in a marriage, yeah, that's going to create some chronic stressors. And of course, there can also be chronic stress at work, right? So if you're short-staffed, if you are doing a lot of stuff and not getting a break, if you're taking calls at all times during the day and night, I mean, yeah, eventually, something's got to give. And there is what we call, burnout. Burnout can occur. Burnout is really just another name for, chronic stress, and the effects that happen with that. We kind of check out, disengage, and try to protect ourselves. However way we know how, we try to seek some relief somewhere, somehow. We need to escape it all, and that's kind of what happens with chronic stress. At least in a way that's not well managed. So let's kind of begin that process. And again, you don't have to use the question feature or the chat feature on this one, but I do want you to kind of consider, because this is kind of where we're going to go, is we got to ask ourselves, well, where are we right now? In terms of your place of balance. And I know it's subjective, and we have to recognize that, but what's happening right now? We're going to do an exercise to help us kind of look at that. Next question is, well, where do we want to go? What might balance look like? Sometimes, if you're, in a chronic stress situation, whether it's too much work or something in your personal life, you usually don't even know what it would like. You don't even know where you want to go. You just don't like where you're at right now. But then we will talk a bit about, how do we move? How do we begin to kind of reassert control, make choices, feel more empowered? And that's kind of the whole point of training like this, is for you to regain some sense of, personal control, being in charge. All right, so let's begin with the kind of assessment process. So I know I said, imbalance, or, work-life imbalance is, subjective, and that's certainly true. And so what we kind of want to look at then is, symptoms, right? How do you know? When life is out of balance, things start sort of happening, and you start to see it. And so, yes, there is dissatisfaction. Often there's a sense of being stuck, but there are other symptoms. And again, feel free to use that question feature. So, if you are experiencing a sense of imbalance, how do you know? Like, what do you begin to see in your life? What sort of starts to give? Again, maybe you're more irritable. Maybe you're not sleeping well. Maybe you just have difficulty concentrating. What do you begin to see? What starts to happen? Someone says not much gets accomplished. Yeah, productivity starts to shift. Lack of restful sleep. Someone says lack of focus. Yeah, these are really good. I mean, they're not good, to have these obviously, but it's good that we can identify them. Waking up constantly during the night. Yeah, I woke up at 6 a.m. I usually sleep till 7, but I was up at 6. Second, the lack of sleep, irritability, making silly errors, nervousness. Yeah. So one of the things you see, and some people have already mentioned this, is sleep problems. That's one of the first things you kind of see is, either difficulty falling asleep or waking up in the middle of the night and you can't fall back to sleep again. Um, your sleep isn't really restful. Someone says, I just feel exhausted all the time. Yeah, yeah, that's a big one. And sleep is something that's going to be really important, obviously, because if you're not well rested, all of your ability to manage all that stuff in your life, well, that's going to be compromised. So this is the thing that is most important, is our health and our sleep. But that's the kind of the first thing that goes, right? Sometimes there's appetite problems. In a more serious situation, the person stops eating. They're just too stressed to even eat. Anxiety can sometimes bring that on. On the other hand, some people start gaining weight, right? Because they're just doing a lot of stress eating, and stress eating does work. I mean, if you're really stressed, and you eat something, usually something fatty and or sweet or salty. There's chips. There's all kinds of things, and we think of as comfort food. Oh boy, you do feel better, absolutely. But the thing is, then we've got another problem on our hands if we keep doing that. Shutting yourself out from the world. Yeah, that kind of withdrawal that takes place. You just kind of, and again, all of these things are kind of, if you look at them in some ways, sort of solutions to the problem. Irritability, moodiness. We just get kind of reactive. Someone here says loss of inner joy. The tired lethargy, muscle tension. I get backaches. Eventually, the body gives out. Immune system is weak. You can get sick easily, or have other physical issues happen more frequently. Yeah, absolutely right. You begin to, under stress. People are just more inclined to get infections and a whole host of things. And this certainly is not an exhaustive list of sort of the effects of imbalance in one's life. But I think sometimes dissatisfaction is a nice way. Someone says, yes, getting sick is a fact, especially gut health. Oh yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's sort of this emotional component. Dissatisfied, frustrated, helpless, maybe angry, feeling victimized. So again, the idea is to begin to look at one's life and say, all right, well, is any of this happening? And I think, if there's one takeaway from today's session, I'm hoping that it's at least that one can kind of objectively, assess one's experience and say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, this is happening to me. And there's a value in that. And I want to be clear about that. The moment you can articulate and say, yeah, I'm not sleeping well, I'm more irritable than I normally am, making a lot of mistakes, I've got back pain again, okay. The moment you can kind of say that, indeed, ideally out loud or to somebody else, or to write it down, then it's like, okay, your brain, there's a shift that takes place. And it's like, okay, well, now what? What do I do now? But what we don't want to do is sort of live, under this in a way that we never fully articulate it. We never fully say, hey, this is what's happening. So it's kind of an interesting distinction, and we're going to talk more about that in just a few moments. But part of the thing we want to be capable of doing is saying, yeah, this is going on. And then we have that ability to shift and say, all right, well, what do I do about it? And that what do I do about it? And the steps we may then take just gives us back a little bit of control, a little bit of sense of, oh, all right, I'm doing something about it. So we'll get into that in a few moments. Someone here says can't function overall, even not feeling well enough to commute to work, have to be able to operate a vehicle properly. Yeah, so then that's obviously a pretty severe symptom where even the commute is affected. So yeah, thank you for disclosing that. The way I think about with training and people's disclosure, if somebody says it, well, a lot of people are probably experiencing it. Someone says, yeah, there have been times I've had to pull over and stop before I could continue. Yeah. So I want to talk, before we get to sort of solutions, I want to talk about what we think of as kind of risk factors. Um, and risk factors are several. And by risk factors, I mean sort of what kind of a person is likely to end up with work-life imbalances. I'm not saying, that anybody or, just certain people are going to have this. No, of course, anybody can. But they're what we think of as risk factors, and one of them is difficulty saying no. Now, that's an important one because earlier, even somebody said that in the chat feature. They say, feel like I can't say no. See, the thing about saying no is that if you don't say no or can't sort of assert yourself, is that you end up taking on more responsibility. You're already working at capacity. And then you begin sacrificing things got to give, right? Whether it's your health, whether it's your personal life, things start to happen. Things start to slip. So that ability to say no is really critical. Now, I want to talk a little bit about saying no just right now. One of the things about saying no is that, it's probably the most important word in the English language, the word no. When you're, a baby, you don't talk yet, but, you smile when you're happy and you cry when you're upset. But when you get to be about the age of 2, we learn that word no. And, it's no, 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 no everything. And that's an important sort of developmental step for a little person. It's, hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this. You can't tell me what to do. Adults may be annoyed or amused by that, but it's a very important developmental step. But then once that child gets a little bit older, 3, 4, 5, then it begins to realize that, hey, and people don't like that typically if I say no to everything, and I'm going to be, upsetting people. People might not like me if I say no, or I might be disappointing somebody, or you might be told not to say no anymore. And then what happens is that person then starts living their life and they're not saying no. Maybe they get a job somewhere and can't say no. Well, you're going to get, overwhelmed with work. Everyone's going to be dumping on you. And you look around, you think, not only am I overwhelmed, but nobody else is doing the amount of work I'm doing. That doesn't seem fair. And then you're not really respected either. People may rely on you, but it's hard to respect people that don't say no. It really is. So again, somebody who, is not saying no because, they want to be, liked and maybe loved, ends up feeling overwhelmed, resentful, disrespected. So that ability to say no, and we're going to talk about that in a few slides, it is absolutely critical to work-life balance, whether you're doing that in your personal life or your professional life. Your ability to sort of protect what's important by saying no. The other thing I want to talk a bit about is another risk factor is often, and I see this in myself as I do this, but the ability, or rather the routinely criticizing oneself. Now, when folks make a mistake, when you don't live up to expectations, whether it's your own or somebody else's, or some combination thereof, often people who are inclined to develop work-life balance problems, they make themselves feel pretty bad. They're pretty cruel to themselves, actually. Let me give you an example, right? So I'm a trainer, and I do training, and I've been doing that for a while now. And I can do, a bad training. I can do, a pretty mediocre job on occasion. Now, I'm hoping this isn't one of those occasions, but, maybe it is. I don't know. But there's worse I can do. And probably the worst thing I can do as a trainer is not just do a bad job, but not show up. Yeah, and there's been instances over the years where, my schedule got messed up. And I say that in sort of this passive voice. I messed it up. I didn't enter something that I should have. Something didn't get into my calendar. or I overlooked it. Either way, you know, I don't show up, and there's, you know, hundreds of people maybe that are just waiting on me. And when I find out about it, and I usually do, there's an email that alerts me to the fact that I wasn't there, and it will say, where were you? Where was the trainer? You know, something like that. What happened? We were waiting, you know, something like that. I feel terrible. Oh boy, it's like there's a hole in the ground that just opens up, and I climb right in and start tossing dirt over myself. It's like, oh, I'm mortified by it. What I used to do is I would print out the emails I would receive. You know, that would, you know, these alert emails that I had missed the training. That doesn't happen really often, maybe once a year or something like that. But I would print the email out, and I would, you know, highlight it in yellow, and I would tape it to my wall. So, you know, when I would look at that, I would think, oh my gosh, you know, don't do that again, Eric. That was terrible. Oh boy, that should never ever happen again. That was just awful. And so maybe I had about a half dozen of these up on my wall. Now the question I would have for you is, you think this would work? You think it did work? I mean, did it help me be a better trainer? Did it help me stop making these mistakes of either not checking my calendar or, you know, making sure everything got, you know, entered? Do you think it would work? Would it work for you, or would it work for anybody to be that cruel? Someone says no, because you relive it every time you were reminded. No, it would not work. And you're absolutely right, because it didn't work. It didn't work at all. In fact, it created a lot of stress. And the thing about that is, with all that stress, I just pushed it all aside. You know, I had this, I called it my wall of shame. And, you know, I'd walk into my office and I would see all these emails, you know, dripping with yellow highlighter, and I wouldn't look at it because that was stressful. It's like, well, why do I want to be reminded of all that stress? It was like, those were bad times, and I'm not going to think about that anymore. So I never learned from it. I just felt bad. And with all that stress, I often behaved in kind of ways that, you know, were kind of not productive. You know, I might shoot off an email saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, or whatever. And it's like, maybe I didn't need to do that right away. Maybe I could have waited, or there might have, but I never stopped to really look at, hey, how could I rectify the situation? How could I not keep doing that? Because I just felt so bad about it. I was even unable to problem solve. So one of the things you find it, and I see this not only myself, but I see this certainly in other people as this sort of profile that, yeah, they make themselves feel pretty guilty, and that guilt does not serve a helpful purpose. In fact, it creates a problem. Now people do it, and I did it, you know, motivationally, thinking, you know, if I felt so bad, maybe I would stop. But it doesn't work that way. And I'm not just saying that from my personal experience, but good research suggests that, yeah, being cruel to oneself is not an effective strategy for responding to mistakes or errors or things that we regret doing. And of course, another risk factor is, you know, people don't talk about it. It's like, well, you know, I should be tough, right? You know, if I'm tough, then, you know, I can handle all this. Just got to push it all away. Yeah, that is not going to be helpful. Nor another risk factor is folks that end up with work-life imbalance just simply haven't managed, you know, stress effectively. And by that I mean they just assume that somehow their strength of their character is going to allow them to, you know, persevere. And it doesn't work that way. We have to deliberately do things in order to manage the imbalance. Balance isn't going to go away in a moment, but the moment we sort of are more deliberate about it, things do get better. They do get better. So let's start to look at what we need to do. So what I have here is a jar. And sometimes, and this is back in the day, I've been a trainer for a long time now. And of course, this is a webinar. But before we did webinars, yeah, I used to do a lot of in-person training. And I would show up to a session of work-life balance, and I would have a jar like this. You know, it was kind of an oversized mason jar. And I would hold it up, and I would say, you know, no, I would just hold it up and show the audience. And then I would, you know, bend over, and on the floor I had a bag. In this bag I had rocks. And then I pick up the bag, and I put rocks in the jar. And I could fit maybe, you know, 4 or 5 of these golf ball sized rocks in here. All right. And then I hold up the jar and I say, is this jar now full? And people look at that and go, yeah, it looks pretty full. You can't put any more of those rocks in there. But then there's usually somebody who knows kind of what's going on here, and they say, no, that jar's not full. There's spaces between those big rocks. I say, you're right. And then I bend over, and in my bag, I've got smaller rocks. And these are about the size of marbles. And I get like a handful of these marble-sized rocks, and I toss them into the jar, and they kind of slip down between the big rocks, and maybe another handful of these smaller marble-sized rocks goes in there. And then I shake it around a bit and put a few more in there. And then I hold it up a second time and say, is this jar now full? Like some carnival barker. And people look at that and go, yeah, okay, maybe, yeah, it looks full to me. But then somebody else says, no, that jar's not full. There's still spaces there. And I smile knowingly. And in my bag, I've got sand. And then I pour sand into the jar. And I get about a cup of sand in there. I shake it around. I pour a little more sand in there until I can't get any more sand in there. And then I hold it up again and say, is this jar now full? And people look at that and go, well, yeah, it looks pretty full. You couldn't put any more rocks in there, that's for sure. And then I pour my coffee into the jar, right? And it drips down between the rocks and the sand. And then, it makes a mess, which is why I never do this anymore. But then I hold it up and say, what's the point of this exercise? What's the point of this demonstration? What do you think it would be? If you were there, maybe you heard me describe it, and you saw me holding up this dripping, jar of rock and sand, coffee. What might you say? What would be the point of such a demonstration? Here we go. You can always find room for more. Yeah. There's always room for coffee. You can always add something more on the margins, but it gets messy. I like that. That's creative. Yeah. It's the weight we carry. Someone typed in. All the things we have to do. Well, I'll tell you, somebody kind of, I think all these are true in one respect, but somebody here said this, and let me repeat it. It's the rocks. The rocks are the most important things. Sand and things are stuff that follows. Yeah, it's kind of about the big rocks, right? If you don't put the big rocks in first, they're not going to get stuck in later, right? The sand, the coffee, all that other stuff is, stuff, right? But it's the big rocks. If we don't put those in first, then yeah, we're going to be in trouble, won't we? Can't stick those in later. So the question then is, all right, well, what are those big rocks? Well, it's going to be a little different for everybody. But if we look at big rocks tend to be things like, well, could be your health, right? We need your health, right? It might be personal growth, your ability to, it could be religious faith, it could be your connection with your own self, artistic expressions, but personal growth, that's a big rock, right? Family and friends, the relationship you have with your significant other, which is different from family and friends, right? Recreation, stuff you do to unwind, relax, hobbies. The home environment. If your house is falling apart, is it well maintained? I really love gardening. That's my thing. And yeah, financial situation, right? How much money do you have or not have in the bank? Stability in that regard. And your career, your job, what you do for a living. There might be other things that you could sort of think of that might be considered big rocks, but I think this is probably a fair representation for the big things that are important to us in life. Somebody here says the space is filled with air can represent the quiet moments we need to refuel and rest. Oh, I like that. That's a nice metaphor. Yeah, see, that's kind of cool. You can kind of, come up with a metaphor for anything. I like that. All right. So let's do an exercise here. Now, the thing about all this is that this is a webinar, and I know you're remote, and I don't have some piece of paper and pen to hand to you. But if you have a piece of paper in front of you, it's a simple enough thing you can do, or you can just do this later after we're done, if you so desired. But what you can do is draw a circle, and then we draw a cross through the center of that circle, and an X through the cross. And thereby we get 8 sort of, slices of pie or spokes in a wheel. And what we're going to do here is we're going to just take a look at the balance in our life right now. We're going to take a look at the big rocks. And what I'd want you to do here, and this is, again, entirely subjective. You don't have to, this isn't, rocket science or anything. There's no mathematical equations, but just rate your present level of satisfaction with that particular rock or that, slice of pie of life, So let's say, and you can see they're all represented, like career would be here, your financial situation, your health, relationship with friends and family, significant other, personal growth, maybe your faith, fun, recreation, physical environment. So anyway, there might be other rocks. You can substitute other things here if you like. And so we're going to rate them. So this might be an example of somebody who would rated them. So maybe they love their job, right? They go, I'm going to give it a 9. Maybe not a 10, but it's going to be a 9. I love what I do. And I used to do, one of my first jobs, I worked in a call center, and I'd have to do kind of intake interview for people that were calling. And one of the questions I'd ask their people is, to what extent do you like your job, rated on a 1 to 10? And and the people that were calling me were from a grocery chain. It was a large national grocery chain. You probably know it if I mentioned it. And what I found to be kind of interesting is that cashiers almost always rated their satisfaction with their career is like right at the top. They go, "Oh, I love my job. I'm going to give it a 10." And I thought, really, here I am, doing, clinical work, I've got all this education. I don't think I'd ever give myself a 10, but oh yeah, cashiers, they love their jobs. I shouldn't say everybody, but it was just kind of astounding to me, and I'm not sure even why that was the case. But yeah. Anyway, so to what extent do you, happy with your career and what you do? Someone says that's surprising. I would think it would have been lower. Yeah, me too. I wouldn't expect, because I interviewed people that, store directors, I interviewed pharmacists, pharmacy techs, baggers, floral people in the floral department, stock people, but it was the cashiers that maybe it was just the interaction with people. Maybe people that want to be a cashier, they are maybe a little more extrovert. I don't know. I mean, there could be a variety of explanations, I think, but yeah. So anyway, yeah. So to do this little exercise, we kind of give it a number, just on basic, on your level of present satisfaction, and then you color it in. Someone says, "I've worked in farm. It's a tough job." Oh yeah, I could imagine. Yeah. Pharmacy is difficult. Yeah. So what happens here then is you get sort of a visual depiction of your life right now. And again, it could change next week. It could, maybe different from what it was last week. And so once we get this, and again, feel free to just do it right now if you'd like. It's simple enough. And then what we want to do is kind of, well, what do we get out of this then, right? So this person obviously loves their job. Maybe they're paid pretty well. They've got a nice home. They're proud of their physical environment. But there's stuff that's kind of given way here, though, right? Maybe their health is not so good. Maybe they got diabetes, and that's not well controlled. Maybe they wish they could do more with friends and family. Personal growth, it seems like it's almost an afterthought. So yes, this is going great, but there's some problems here, as we can see. And so I would encourage you to kind of do this. And again, it's all subjective and it can change, and that's the point of it, really. But it does give us kind of an idea. So if this is a wheel, if we take that an analogy, then this would be a pretty bumpy ride, right? Ka-thunk, 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 if it's going around and around. What we want is some degree of symmetry in our lives. Again, it doesn't have to be, rating everything at a 7 or a 9 or something, but there's a sense of I feel kind of in control with this, and I have to agree. It's not out of control. It's something that I'm aspiring towards. I feel greater sense of symmetry in my life, and there's just this increased sense of balance. So yeah, this allows us to kind of visually depict what our experience is. And then we start to see something. We begin to see that we're saying yes here a lot, but we're not, we're sacrificing this other stuff. What we say yes to, we're kind of then saying no to, right? So we can see where we are sacrificing, where we're suffering. By saying yes, we're kind of saying no. So that's an important thing. And if you look at your completed balance wheel, assuming you'll do that, or maybe you've just done it, you kind of see, well, where am I, prioritizing and where am I not? By saying yes to one thing, we're kind of saying no to something else, aren't we? By saying no to something, maybe you're able to say yes to something else. And what are those areas in your life that we need to, make sure are in that jar of life, So one of the things that we're striving for, and this is a theme throughout today's session, is this idea of choice. What happens when people's lives get out of balance is they begin to feel victimized. It's like all these pressures, all these obligations, all these things are pressing in on one. And I feel like this helpless, victim, and I got to escape, or I feel resentful, maybe even angry, and I feel out of control. But when we do this sort of map, and you get a sense of, oh, okay, well, I'm kind of in control here to some extent, right? There's choices I can actually make or not make, and it kind of puts us back into the driver's seat. And so it's about the capacity to step forward and to set limits on our own life. Sometimes it involves setting limits on other people, but primarily it's you making choices. And so we want to be, in the driver's seat of our lives. And so part of the thing is, saying no is hard, whether it's to an employer, to a colleague, to a child, to a parent, to somebody making demands. And so what we kind of want to be able to do is, when we say no, we're doing that from a place of strength, from a place of conviction. Because the thing about saying no, specifically to somebody else, is when we say no, we're going to disappoint them. Maybe we're even disappointing ourselves. And so we have to be clear why we're saying no. I'm saying no because, well, this other thing, I'm going to jump back here, is important. If I say yes, yes, yes here, well, I'm kind of saying no here. So I'm going to say no here or wherever it is, because I'm protecting this slice of pie or this chunk or this big rock. I know they're mixing metaphors here, but hopefully you get what I mean. So in order to say no to anyone, even to ourselves, we got to be clear about why we're doing that. We don't have to explain it to the other person, but we have to be clear with ourselves, and therefore have a degree of strength and conviction about why we're setting this important limit. So, and then the second piece here, and maybe you know this from business, and that's the idea is, if you say no to somebody, that's usually not too well received by most people. So let's say your company says, Eric, I want you to do a training on the impacts of extraterrestrials on our workforce. Well, I got to say no to that. I don't have a training like that, and I really don't want to put that together because I don't really believe in that. But I'm not going to say, no, I'm not going to do that. That's silly. I'm going to say, well, you know what? I'm not going to be able to do that, but I will do a training on balancing work life. And I know they probably are going to say, well, we don't really want that one. We want the extraterrestrial. We want the training on ET, because that's the thing. But they're going to end up saying thank you anyway, Eric, because I offered something else. And this is kind of a trick. It's a business trick. I don't want to say it's a trick so much because that sounds manipulative, but the idea is that when you say no, yeah, affirm your no, but then offer some alternative, something you are willing to do, even though they don't want that. Somebody asks for a $5,000 loan, maybe it's a good friend. You say, well, I'm not going to give you the loan. However, I'm going to, refer you to my banker, right? They're very reasonable. Maybe you can get a great loan there. Well, no, I really don't want that. I don't want to go, but thanks anyway. You see, it's a stratagem. It allows you to set limits more effectively. Any questions so far? Did anybody do the balance wheel at home? Anybody get any insights? You did, all right. Any insights from your ability to look at that? It says, what if you're expected to do something because you are considered the subject matter expert? Yeah, well, that's the thing, we as humans are really responsive to other people's, expectations and their own, perceptions of who we are. It's hard to sort of, pull back from what we think is expected from us. And that's never easy. But hopefully an exercise like this, that map can and hopefully does make a difference in the sense that you can begin to look at it and say, oh yeah, this is kind of giving way here, maybe. Someone says, it did give me something to think about. Or say that you need to get back to them at a later time so you can breathe and come up with an alternative. I'm also learning that no is a full sentence. Yeah, so we want to be clear about our no's, and yet I think it's relevant to, or important to sort of recognize that for many people it's just hard to do, and to do it in a way that you do it with strength and assurance that, hey, if I say yes here, I got other obligations. You don't have to explain to them why you're saying no, but you want to be clear in your mind why you are, to give yourself some power and authority, and then offer something else. I'm not going to do that, but I'll do this other thing. And I think the next piece here is about that, what we call self-compassion. And so the idea is that to talk to oneself as if, that person's a good friend of yours. And what would a good friend say if you had to say no, or, made a mistake, or, were suffering in some way? Is your friend going to condemn you and say, oh, you're a loser? No, they're not going to say that. They're going to be kind. They're going to say, well, yeah, it's not what you expected. There's certainly disappointment there. And the moment we do that, we kind of ease up on ourselves. Someone here says, I'll be kind, but I'm easily convinced. LOL, so I have to say no. Give me a second here. I'm going to open up this question feature here. Got a little narrow window, which I can see these things. So I have to say no kindly and not worry that I'm judged for it. Yeah, absolutely. I read in a book where the author shared we're going to disappoint others, and that's okay because it's an unrealistic expectation to satisfy everybody. I don't try to disappoint people intentionally, but the reality is that it's gonna happen, which has helped relieve some of the stress of other expectations. Yeah, I love that idea. And so, yes, I fully endorse that. We're gonna disappoint everybody, including ourselves at some point. Even today's training, is everybody going to love this? No, there's probably people who, checked out and said, this was terrible, waste of time. But other people, may really have, benefited by it. And I would hope that to be the case, but it won't devastate me if people don't like it or are disappointed. I like to think of it as it's all learning, right? I'm getting better as a trainer. When I make a mistake, well, it's time for improvement, getting some feedback. It's not pleasant. I'm not saying it is or should be in any respects, but I like to think of it always as kind of a learning opportunity. That's how I frame it. Someone says, we can't always satisfy everyone. Yep. In fact, we really don't. And I think the thing is, how do you manage that? How do you talk yourself through that kind of experience when you're not satisfying somebody, or somebody doesn't like it, or someone is disappointed, or is even judging you harshly? What do you do about that? How do you frame that in your own mind? How do you kind of let go? So yeah, I like that. Thank you for posting that. You cannot always say no because some things are not within your power to say no. Yeah, I think, the thing about saying no is, it's all about one's experience of control. In psychology, there's a term we use called self-efficacy. Self-efficacy, it's a belief, and it's important to our well-being that we're in charge. We believe that we can manage our lives. that we're kind of in charge. Now that may be an illusion of some sort. Yeah, I would get that, but it's a kind of a belief. And when people are doing well, when people are free from mental health suffering, they have high rates of self-efficacy. They just feel like, hey, I can manage stuff. I'm in charge. Things are going to be fine. There's optimism as well. And so the idea that you can set some limits in your life, that you can sort of reassert control, authority, where you're making decisions, and that you're not a victim, and that you're not helpless and or out of control. Those are small yet profoundly big gains. We're like, oh yeah, I can do that. It's like this. Let me give you an example, right? So let's say somebody is in an accident, and maybe it's a car accident. Well, let me back this up a little bit. I'll do it another way. So let's say you've got a crystal ball and you can see into the future, right? And you see, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in an automobile accident in 6 months. It's going to be a terrible accident, and as the result of this accident, I'm going to be paraplegic. I'll be in a wheelchair. Now, a lot of people looking at that, going, "Oh my God, that's horrible. That's awful. I don't think I can live. That's oh my gosh. That'll be awful, horrible." Some people might want to, take their own lives seeing that, saying, "Oh my gosh, there's no way I can do that." But if the reality actually transpires and somebody does, obviously, get injured in an automobile accident and they are left paraplegic, I'm not saying that that's a cheerful, happy experience. No way. It's a traumatic, horrible thing. But yet, when you see what happens, is the person doesn't immediately become suicidal, but they find ways of regaining control. They learn how to, transfer themselves from the wheelchair onto the toilet, or they, start to dress themselves. They find, where they can, operate the wheelchair, how it all works, where they can go, how they can navigate. They gain back control, and with that, well-being. And in many, many instances, people sort of reclaim the well-being they had prior to the accident. It doesn't happen right away, and of course, there's a big, decline in well-being, around the event. But it's that reclaiming of personal power, that self-efficacy, which is critical. So, other things that I think are relevant, things that maybe are big rocks that we need to focus on. We talked a bit about self-compassion here, but these other things, they seem to be really important. Making sure you're taking time off, that you're looking forward to stuff. What kind of happens when people get burnt out is they're not looking forward to anything anymore. It's like it's just getting through the day, and there isn't anything out there for them that's exciting or inspiring, or and those could be a lot of things. Those could be somebody's wedding. It could be taking a vacation. There's a lot of things that we can look forward to potentially. But I think those are important. To still have things in your life that you're doing that you enjoy. Hobbies are wonderful in that regard. We kind of lose ourselves in them. Valuing that sleep. Keep moving. Go outside whenever possible. And of course, be in those relationships that we like, where we can disclose, we can feel connected. That's the thing about humans, we're social creatures. We need to belong. We need to feel useful. And to have that kind of stuff, going on in your life is important. We want to make those big rocks a priority. All right. So we're almost done here. So if there's any questions, thoughts, comments, or insights from your experience today, maybe of doing that exercise or other things you wanted to mention, or how things are going with your work-life balance. But I have an acronym here, BALANCE. Balance is something that it can be achieved, right? I mean, it's subjective, and that's okay. That's kind of how it ought to be. It does involve our capacity to assess our experience, to see it. And I think that exercise, that balance wheel is a good way to do that, although probably other ways. Often it just simply begins with your ability to say, hey, this is going on, and these are the impacts. Letting go of unrealistic expectations. What are they? Can't satisfy everybody. And that's the whole piece about saying no. It's like, it's your difficulty letting go of that, trying to satisfy everybody, making sure you know what those big rocks are, and we act upon those goals and priorities, saying the word no in a way that respects ourselves and of course others, and make sure we're connected with other people. And lastly, of course, you're having a plan in place that we're making all this happen. And of course, our best plans will always go awry in some way. So I want to thank you for coming here today. There is additional resources, NC State University Faculty and Staff Assistance Program, that's your EAP. You can call us, right? You can talk to a counselor. There's a lot of great services available. It's free, it's confidential, and it's available not just to you, North Carolina State University faculty and staff, but it's also available to anybody in your household. Yeah, it's a benefit. It's not tied to your insurance. You can give us a call, or you can go to our website, guidanceresources.com, poke around there. If you do that, you'll need this web ID code, FASAP. All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today. And I'm honored to have, spent the time with you. I hope this has been helpful, or at the least interesting for you. Thank you so much for all of your contributions, your involvement. I think that matters. I think that allows you to